Welcome to AP Euro for Winners, the spooky edition.
Today, we are talking about the commercial revolution, and we hope you enjoy our Halloween style format because we are excited for Halloween, even if it's a little early. Let's define commercial revolution. It's the creation of a European economy based on trade. And as you see throughout this slideshow and video, we're going to see some economic and cultural shifts due to the revolutionization of banking, agriculture, and the market economy. And we'll dissect all three of those concepts for you.
First thing we're going to look at within the commercial revolution is innovations in banking. So, what are they? First, we have double entry bookkeeping. Sounds pretty exciting. Okay, but basically what this is in the Renaissance, it's like an accounting system for managing debits and credits, makes everything more stable, makes sure everybody's on the same page. Another big innovation here is the Bank of Amsterdam, which was founded in 1609. This is an example of a modern bank, and the Bank of Amsterdam represents one of the first modern central banks for a country. So this means now that people could purchase goods by credit or paper currency, and this is going to allow more common people to take out loans, to create bigger businesses, and to take bigger risks. Another example of a way people can take bigger risks and make more money is called a joint stock company, which is a company where individuals can purchase shares and they can share in the earnings, and they could also share in how much losses they make. It helps them mitigate their risk. So one of the most famous example of this is the British East India Company in the 1600s, and they were a trading company focused on cotton, tea, sugar, a lot of other goods like that. And when they made money, they gave that money back to their shareholders, as they made those earnings. So we can think of this as like context for some of the first ideas of capitalism and for our future stock market.
And these innovations in banking even impact art. So as we see here, this was a painting made in 1514, where a girl on the right is looking at the bookkeeper counting money, and notice what she's looking away from. It's the Bible. So even the art world is showing the focus on banking, moving away from kind of what was traditional and all that stuff. So this is a very famous painting.
Another effect, now we're into the effects of the innovations of banking. Okay. So one of them is the financial centers that get created, like Florence and Venice in Italy. They also create a money-based economy. So we have the adoption of banknotes instead of just everyone using gold and silver. And we have the new economic elite. We have two examples for you here. One we've talked about before, but we want to emphasize it: the Medici family in Italy. So the House of Medici was the greatest bank in Europe. They had multiple branches and they were very successful. And again, they were not royalty, but they even at some point got their way into having one of the Medicis become a pope. Okay, so they were not royalty, but they were able to use their money and the banking system to become so wealthy that they got to make political influence. And then another example that we've also talked about is the Fugger family in the German states. And they were a banking family that had so much money that they were able to lend Charles V money so that he could buy his election into his way as emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So again, we have middle class families having so much money that now they can play kingmaker, now that they can really have political power.
So let's talk about another aspect of the commercial industry. We've got the commercialization of agriculture. And let's start with the enclosure movement. This is the consolidation of common land, open fields due to the enclosed or fenced land owned by a few landowners. So we're going to move from the commons to enclosed lands. And then we have innovations in scientific farming. So we have the use of empirical research to find things out that might make farming easier and more effective. Three examples we're going to give you are the elimination of the fallow fields. So that's going to be through like nitrogen restoring crops like turnips and clover, and you alternate what is in that field. So you leave one empty and move on, and it keeps the soil healthier. Then manure is going to be effective, and then crop rotation again kind of goes back to the fallow fields a little bit, where you rotate your crops, you leave one part empty, and then again, better production of crops. And then we have the Jethro Tull seed drill. It's going to be developed. So it's one of these many innovations that makes farming easier. This is just another example. And then in 1870, English farmers were actually producing 300% more food than in 1700. So that's a significant increase.
Now let's talk about some effects of the commercialization of agriculture. Again, the decline of the fallow fields and the open field system. So the open field system is the idea of the commons where everyone could use some area of land to farm, and we're not seeing that become as popular. So people are now having private farms. Okay, peasants are going to protest this idea, but they're not going to be very successful. So the idea to make it private farms is called the enclosure movement. Peasants don't like this because they don't have enough land, or not, sorry, enough money to buy the land. So they protest this, but not much success there. On the positive side, we do see that the land and farming becomes more productive. So that means we're going to have more food, which, as we saw, is going to help make a larger increase in population. We're going to see the improvement of the status and wealth of large landowners because obviously, if you're having private farms now, if you own more land, you're going to be able to make more food. And this is going to get us into larger herds of cattle and sheep, again, to feed more people, create bigger population growth. And eventually, because of all this private land ownership and the elimination of the enclosure movement, right, which is where people are not able to farm on common ground anymore, a lot of people are going to start to move to the cities to look for work. So a lot of these rural poor people are going to start to move to the cities instead of staying in the rural areas.
All right, so let's look at some things that did not change because of these advancements in the agricultural world. Well, most Europeans are still going to derive their livelihood from agriculture, right? So they're going to orientate their lives on the seasons, the village, the manor. Subsistence agriculture in most areas is still going to be used. So it's like a 3-crop field rotation in the north and then a 2-crop rotation in the south. So while these new innovations and ideas are coming out, not everyone's accepting them and using them. And then secondly, as Western Europe moved towards a free peasantry and commercial agriculture and kind of embracing all this, much about life in Eastern Europe is going to stay the same. Right? Serfdom was still being used in Eastern Europe. Nobles could continue to dominate economic life on large estates. State and landlords levied heavy taxes and high rents. Peasants had to work a lot of days, hard days on the lord's land with no pay, right? We have places like Austria, Prussia, and Russia especially. And then again, in contrast to Western Europe, where serfs could own land and pass it on to their children. Right? We're seeing huge differences kind of Eastern, Western Europe.
Next topic we want to talk about is something called the price revolution. And we want to give you a little bit of context for that. So this is where the market economy is going to continue to expand. So here's your context. We're going to see an increase in the population after the plague, which led to a higher demand for goods, which then increased food prices, right? So we have more people, which means we want more stuff, which means those prices are going to go up. This is going to lead to a decrease in the food supply because all of this is happening really quickly. And so if we have a decrease in the food supply, we're going to get food shortages, which is who's that going to hurt the most? The poor. So how are we going to respond to this? Europeans are going to respond to this. One huge thing is they're going to delay marriage and they're going to delay childbearing. So they're going to wait for these big life events until their later 20s so that they can have more resources. They can establish their house. They can own land so that they can feel more stable and settled before they enter marriage and before they have children. So it's a really important idea. So we highlighted in yellow, okay? This marriage pattern of pushing marriage back later is going to put population growth a little bit lower. It's going to restrain it. And ultimately, it's going to improve the economic conditions of families in the long run. Okay, so these ideas are what's going to result in what we call the price revolution.
All right, the price revolution. Our definition is going to be a rise in the price of goods between 1500 and 1650 due to the increased supply of gold and silver and population growth, right? Mr. Johnson just talked about the supply and demand and what happened to the price of goods. And here we see it, increased supply of gold and silver. So this is going to enable the middle class to acquire more wealth. Middle class is also going to be able to kind of separate themselves from the lower class. They're not going to really struggle that much. Lower class was able to get more food, but there's still going to be that class difference. And then with more people, more consumer demand for goods, which means a steady rise in prices. Also, that leads to inflation, right? Rise in prices, your value of your money is going down. But this also stimulates the production of goods. So it's kind of weighing good and bad, but it does end up being pretty good because more production of goods means more supply equals the demand a little bit more. Nobility does suffer a little bit as their income was fixed, right? So their standard of living decreases. And then again, like I said, peasants do benefit from this because they can have more food while there's still the class differences. But then one thing to note is that peasants could take their surplus yields and their extra crops and they could be turned into cash crops and they could make a little bit more money off that because the demand is still there.
So what are the results of this economic change? Well, this is a really important result that College Board likes to know. So there are attempts of the landowners to increase how much money they're making by restricting or abolishing peasant rights. And so remember, we talked about how a lot of landowners, their income was fixed. So they're trying to find ways to save more money. And so when they're abolishing these peasant rights, there's going to be revolts. And there's a very famous example called the German Peasants' Revolt of 1523 to 1524. So what happens in this? There's a lot of peasants who are upset about serfdom. They do not appreciate their status in the world. And peasants for this revolt in Western and Southern Germany, they basically demand rights and freedom for land, and they want freedom from oppression from their nobles and from the landlords. And so they start to fight back against their nobles. Okay, and as a result of this revolt, 100,000 peasants die. And it's not successful. It's a failed revolt. And after this, more restrictions get put upon peasants and serfs, which discourages them from making further attempts to try to create revolution or try to create change. So this is one of the examples of what happens because of these economic changes.
And then we're going to continue these results and go really bigger picture. So with people and farmers migrating to cities, we have a lot of overpopulation occurring, right? Those farmers that couldn't produce any more money or food for their families, or just they're stuck, they have to turn to the cities. So all these people rushing in, this urbanization leads to unemployment, poverty, crime, and sanitation problems. All of this we are going to see when we cover the Industrial Revolution in a couple units. But just to note, the more people you have in one place, the harder it is to live a little bit. Here are the historical developments that College Board wants you to know. Again, please read through them and make sure that it all sounds familiar to you. Thank you for watching.
Bye.